The rim of the helmet is bent like a snapped oath. It lies half-sunk in the dark loam of cockeries, where rainwater pools and the stamp of old footprints and the soil smells like iron left too long in a wet fist. Run a thumb along the curve, careful, because the edge is still sharp in places, and you can feel how it buckled, not in a forge, but under a lateral blow, the kind delivered when a man cannot raise his shield high enough because another man's shoulder is already there, because the line has become a jam, because the road has become a throat. Around it, Augustan coins, some bright where the clay preserved them, some greened with time, sit scattered as if a purse tore open while the owner was falling. There is wet leather implied in every find, straps, sandals, the softened warp of gear soaked through. There is clogged grit, too, packed where hobnails once bit into a track that was never meant to carry a city's worth of people and animals and wagons through a forest that does not want them. If you listen with the imagination disciplined by evidence, you can hear shield rims knocking, wood and metal striking wood and metal, because the column has compressed, and men are too close for dignity, too close for formation, too close to breathe without tasting another man's breath. This is not the opening of a heroic duel, it is the autopsy of a system beginning to fail. Varus is not marching like a man who expects war. Publius Quinctilius Varus, governor, commander, the man entrusted with turning a frontier into a province, moves east of the Rhine with the posture of administration. You can see it in the baggage train, in the presence of non-combatants and camp followers, in the engineers and surveyors who measure land the way Rome measures everything, as if to say, this is already ours. His 3 legions, 17, 18, 19, are not merely soldiers today, they are the mobile architecture of Roman order. There are clerks with tablets, men carrying ink that will freeze and run in the rain, men tasked with turning disputes into casework and tribute into ledgers. There are auxiliaries, too, the local muscle and local knowledge that Rome uses as both bridge and buffer. Among them walks a Cheruscan noble with a Roman name and a Roman rank, a man trained inside the empire's own grammar of command, Arminius. And somewhere in the column, somewhere between the standards and the wagons and the herd animals, there are families, servants, traders, the human soft tissue that gathers around any army when it believes the road is safe enough. That belief is the first casualty, and it dies quietly, one misstep at a time. The clock that matters is not carved on a sundial, it is in the sky and in the ground. Late summer sliding into early autumn, AD 9, northern Germania. The daylight shortens by minutes you can feel when you are marching with a load, because the last hour of light is when you most need to choose where to fortify. A storm system moves in with a patience that is more frightening than a sudden squall, it turns tracks to slick paste, it blurs distances, it dampens bowstrings, it makes a cloak feel like a second-soaked skin. Rome's advantage, discipline, visibility, the ability to compress into a wall and then unfold into a blade, requires space. It requires clear lines of sight to standards, to officers, to the signals that translate chaos into orders. The forest steals space. The marsh steals traction. The weather steals time. Now place the objective in your palm, as tangible as that bent helmet rim. Varus is not merely traveling, he is performing Rome. He means to pacify and administer, collect tribute, adjudicate disputes, enforce law, demonstrate that the emperor's peace extends beyond the Rhine like a shadow that cannot be outrun. Every village brought into the ledger is a proof of concept, Rome can turn a borderland into a province. Arminius's objective is the opposite, but not symmetrical. He is not trying to out-Rome Rome, he is trying to shatter the illusion that Roman order is inevitable. And there is a sub-objective that matters as much as the killing, to break trust between Rome and the local elites who make empire possible. If he can annihilate a field army, yes, blood will speak. But if he can also make the empire doubt its own map, if he can teach Rome that east of the Rhine the cost curve turns vertical, then the boundary hardens, not because the forest is sacred, but because the empire learns its limits. The decisive minute is an engineering problem turning into slaughter. The marching column, already stretched, already vulnerable, hits a constriction, narrow ground between bog and slope. Wagons jam where a wheel sinks and a mule panics and a driver shouts a warning no one can hear. Units lose sight of standards in the rain. The line, which should be a coherent organism, becomes a series of isolated muscles twitching without a brain. And then the attacks arrive in pulses from the tree line, javelins that arc out of gray air, stones flung with sling or hand, the sudden sting of something that hits a cheek and turns it hot, then numb. The attackers withdraw as quickly as they appear, leaving the Romans to chase shadows into undergrowth where the shields snag and the ground drinks your ankles. There is no single clang of armies colliding, there is instead the grinding sound of a machine fed the wrong material. The question I brought to this mud, this case file of soil and coin and bone, is simple to ask and brutal to answer. Was Teutoburg primarily a brilliant ambush by Arminius, or a slow-motion systems failure, intelligence, logistics, governance, collapsing in terrain designed to punish arrogance? We have to begin, as any time detective should, with what can be fixed in time and place. The date, AD 9, late summer or early autumn, when the campaigning season is thinning and the weather turns from inconvenience to weapon. The setting, northern Germania, not a neatly bounded nation but a patchwork of woodland, lowland marsh, ridges, and tracks that are more suggestion than road. The Rhine is Rome's frontier line in practice, a river that can be patrolled, bridged, supplied along. East of it, Rome has been testing something more ambitious than raiding, administration. That matters because an army that expects to fight chooses its ground, an army that expects to govern is often forced to respond to reports, petitions, and disturbances on other people's ground. Varus receives word of unrest, exact details are filtered through sources that do not love him, and he moves to address it. The march itself is a decision, and every decision creates a corridor of consequences. Let's inventory strengths, because both sides brought tools to this corridor. Roman strengths are famous and measurable: heavy infantry drilled to move as one, pila designed to wound shields as much as men, the habit of fortification, the nightly ritual of digging and staking and turning earth into defense. Rome also brings the engineers, the ones who cut roads and throw bridges, who can, in good conditions, make terrain obey. Logistics, too, supply chains, rationing, pack animals, scheduled movement. Roman command culture is a technology in itself, a way of turning many wills into one intention. The Germanic strengths are less uniform but no less real: mobility through familiar paths, local intelligence, knowing which bogs are shallow and which swallow oxen, flexible warbands that can appear, strike, and vanish. They are not weighed down by the expectation of holding a line. And, crucially, they are defending not a state but a landscape of loyalties, where kinship and reputation move men faster than pay. Arminius speaks Latin with the ease of a doorway left open. This is where the case becomes intimate, because the hinge of the disaster is not a sword but a relationship. Ancient sources tell us he had Roman citizenship, equestrian status, details that matter because they place him inside the empire's trust architecture. He served with Roman forces, learned their rhythms, their assumptions, their blind spots. He knows how a Roman commander thinks when he is policing rather than campaigning. He knows which signs a Roman reads as routine, a petition, a rumor of unrest, a request for intervention. He knows, too, that Rome runs on intermediaries, the bilingual men who translate grievances into negotiations, who translate orders into compliance. An empire cannot speak every tongue, it hires mouths. Arminius becomes one of those mouths, and then he chooses what to say. Here the first conflict in perspectives arrives, and it is not merely academic, it decides where we place responsibility. One view, call it the classic ambush, argues that Arminius deliberately lured Varus off safer routes into a prepared killing ground, a trap designed in advance, sprung at a chosen moment. In that telling, Teutoburg is the triumph of a tactical mastermind, a man who understands Roman vulnerabilities and engineers a single decisive blow. The opposing view, the running battle model, suggests something messier and, in some ways, more frightening. There may not have been one neat trap at all, but a series of attacks across multiple days, harassment that eroded cohesion, forced repeated emergency camps, and pushed the Romans step by step into worse terrain until they broke at a final constriction. This second view does not diminish Arminius, it reframes his genius as patience and systems manipulation rather than theatrical ambush. Our written sources, like all witnesses, are both invaluable and compromised. Cassius Dio describes a multi-day disaster, an ordeal in rain and forest with repeated assaults and desperate fortifications. He writes long after the event, and his account carries the weight of Roman literary expectations, the moral lesson, the dramatic arc, the convenient villain. Tacitus, writing later still, gives us scenes thick with grief and politics, especially when Germanicus visits the battlefield years after and the bones are gathered. Valerius Paterculus, closer in time and personally invested in praising the imperial family, offers a version with its own emphases and silences. None of them are stenographers in the reign. They are Romans interpreting a trauma, and trauma always seeks a story that can be borne. Suggests tries to hand Varus a fire before the smoke is visible. He is another German noble, another elite navigating the unstable bargain between Rome and local power. The reports say he warned Varus about Arminius, that he named the danger. If that is true, it is a pivot point so sharp you can cut yourself on it. Why would Varus ignore him? Here the debate is fierce, and it matters because it determines whether Teutoburg is a morality play about a fool or a case study in structural trap. Perspective 1 paints Varus as negligent, an administrator pretending policing is not war, a man who mistakes paperwork for pacification. He trusts the wrong intermediary, walks his army into a place where his strengths cannot manifest, and pays the price. This view has the advantage of simplicity and the satisfaction of blame. It also has the scent of Roman self-protection, because blaming a dead governor allows the imperial system to remain wise and sound. Perspective 2 argues Varus was politically constrained and structurally set up. Imperial policy demanded province building, taxation, law, visible governance, before security was fully established. If Varus marched heavily, arrested elites on suspicion, treated every rumor as a battlefield, he would undermine the very claim Rome was making, that it brought lawful order, not perpetual occupation. In that view, Varus chooses trust, or at least the appearance of trust, because empire is a partnership until it isn't. Perspective 3 centers Arminius as the decisive genius, his insider knowledge, his ability to coordinate, his timing. Perspective 4, often overlooked because it lacks a single hero, argues the true miracle is coalition politics. Germanic groups were fractious, competitive, not a nation-state waiting to be born. Arminius's greatest victory, in this model, is not any javelin volley but the temporary alignment of rival groups toward a single target. Hold all 4 perspectives in your mind at once, because Teutoburg is big enough to contain them. The governor can be overconfident and still be fulfilling imperial expectations. The rebel leader can be brilliant and still depend on broader social conditions. The warning can be genuine and still be complicated by local rivalries, suggests might warn Varus out of loyalty to Rome, or out of hatred for Arminius, or out of a calculation about which patron will win. In frontier politics, morality and self-interest often share the same cloak. Now we return to the march, because the march is where abstraction becomes mud. Imagine the column length. 3 legions alone are thousands, and then add auxiliaries, servants, traders, carts, animals. A marching column is a long creature, its head can be in clear ground while its tail is still in swamp. Orders travel by messenger and signal, both slowed by rain and trees. If the column is attacked at multiple points, a commander's intelligence becomes fragmented, reports conflict, distances deceive, and the temptation is to assume a manageable disorder rather than accept you are inside an operation you do not control. Arminius, if he is orchestrating, does not need to defeat Roman courage. He needs to break Roman coherence. On the first day, the forest does not roar, it whispers. The initial strikes are small enough to be dismissed as nuisance, large enough to draw blood. A javelin comes out of the tree line and punches through a cloak into flesh. A stone cracks a helmet and turns a man's face into a sudden mess of warm liquid and teeth. The column tries to respond the way it is trained, close ranks, push toward the threat, bring the weight of formation to bear. But the threat is not a line, it is a set of points that appear and vanish. The Romans can charge the trees, yes, but they cannot make the trees stand still. They cannot make the bog firm. Each attempt to restore order consumes time, and time is what the weather is stealing. By evening, they do what Romans do when fear becomes measurable, they build a camp. Even in hostile country, even under pressure, the habit is to dig and stake, to impose geometry on wilderness. But consider the condition of the men. Their tools are wet. Their hands are cold and cramped. The ground is heavy with water, every shovel load clings and slides back. The camp is smaller than ideal, rushed, imperfect. A Roman camp is supposed to be a machine, tonight it is a bandage. Inside, the engineers count what can be repaired. The quartermasters count what has been lost. The officers count men and find the numbers wrong. Somewhere, a clerk tries to keep a record and finds his ink runs like tears. Day 2 is where confidence begins to break its own teeth. The column moves again because it must, staying invites siege and starvation, and the goal is to reach safer ground, perhaps to fall back toward the Rhine. But movement is slower now. The wounded limp. Wagons with broken axles become obstacles. Horses and mules panic at sounds they cannot identify. The attacks resume, time to exhaustion, time to moments when the column must navigate difficult terrain. The Roman response becomes reactive. Standards that should be visible are swallowed by mist and trees. Cohorts become islands. A soldier swings his sword at a shape and feels it bite into wood, not flesh, and then feels a spear point slide under his ribs from the side he thought was protected. He falls, and the column steps around him because the column cannot stop without dying. Day 3, if we accept the multi-day account, feels less like battle and more like disintegration. The Roman advantage is supposed to be the ability to compress and redeploy, to turn into a wall in open country. Here, in a corridor of forest and slope and bog, the legion is a line, and a line is fragile. Officers cannot be everywhere. Signals do not carry. Men fight in pockets, not as an army. The psychological effect is its own weapon. A soldier who cannot see the standard begins to believe he is already cut off from Rome itself. And once that belief takes root, discipline becomes a thing you remember rather than a thing you live. Somewhere in this sequence, Varus's choices narrow to a slit. There is an old question whispered in military histories: at what point does retreat become rout? At what point does a commander's attempt to save the army become the act that makes saving impossible? If Varus tries to move fast, he abandons baggage and wounded and admits defeat, an admission that can collapse morale. If he moves slow to maintain order, he gives the attackers more hours to bleed him. If he sends out large detachments to clear the way, he weakens the body. If he keeps everyone together, the column stretches and jams. This is how systems failure feels from the inside. Every option has teeth. At Cochrys, the ground itself keeps minutes. Archaeology is not a story, it is a pattern of scars. Coins from around the time of Augustus, including issues current around AD 9, sit in a distribution that suggests movement and loss, men dropping, purses spilling, payment meant for soldiers becoming the forest's silent horde. Weapon fragments, bits of pilum, fittings from scabbards, twisted metal that once belonged to someone's safety, appear along a corridor. Human remains do not lie in neat ranks, they are scattered, mixed, sometimes with signs of post-battle disturbance. The terrain fits the narrative of constriction, a narrow pass between a hill slope and wet low ground. If you want a clean amphitheater for a battle, Cochranes disappoints you. It offers instead a channel, a funnel, a place where a long column can be attacked without the attackers ever having to stand still. There is, too, the debated feature, an earthen wall or rampart line. Many interpret it as German-built, a deliberate structure to block and channel the Romans, forcing them into kill zones. It is an appealing idea because it restores agency and planning to the attackers. It looks like engineering answering engineering. But scholarly caution is not cowardice, it is respect for complexity. Not every mound belongs to the same day, not every scar belongs to the same wound. Some argue parts of the feature could be later, or have other functions, or at least cannot be assigned with absolute confidence to Arminius's hand. What we can say, without turning caution into paralysis, is that the battlefield evidence supports prolonged combat in constrained terrain. The archaeology leans toward the running battle corridor model more than a single theatrical trap, even if a prepared constriction point could still have existed within that longer unmaking. Now we count the loss, because numbers are another kind of artifact, cold, heavy, undeniable. 3 legions, auxiliaries, non-combatants, tens of thousands dead, captured, enslaved. The legionary numbers, 17, 18, 19, are never reissued. That absence is a memorial more severe than a monument. Standards are lost, and for Rome the standard is not just a rallying point, it is a piece of the state's soul. A legion without its eagle is a body without its name. The psychological cost ripples back across the Rhine, back to Rome, back to Augustus himself. You have heard the famous cry attributed to the emperor, Varus, "Give me back my legions." It is quoted with relish because it gives grief a sentence you can repeat. But treat it as you would treat any too perfect line in a case file. It comes to us filtered through later writers. It may preserve a genuine memory, it may be a crafted emblem of imperial anguish. Either way, it tells us something important: Rome needed to narrate this disaster. Empires cannot afford for defeat to remain meaningless, they must turn it into instruction, or scapegoat, or motivation. The words, whether spoken or invented, are part of the recovery operation. Germanicus will later lead campaigns in AD 14 to 16, pushing into Germania, fighting, retrieving at least some lost standards, visiting the battlefield where bones still lie. Tacitus describes the scene with a tenderness that feels like an accusation: soldiers gathering remains, weeping, burying what is left. This is not merely piety, it is politics. To retrieve bones and standards is to reclaim narrative control, to say, Rome can return, Rome can look at the place where it bled and not look away. Yet even Germanicus's campaigns, however fierce, do not translate into permanent province building east of the Rhine. The map that Varus carried in his head is abandoned, not immediately, not without debate, but decisively in the long view. Now we face the most contentious part of the autopsy: who, exactly, killed the legions? Not in the literal sense, spears and stones did that, but in the causal sense. If you want a single villain for Teutoburg, you will be disappointed. History rarely offers such comfort. Still, we can put the blame models on the table like weapons and examine the fingerprints. Model 1, Varus as incompetent. The argument is straightforward. He underestimated the enemy. He marched with the encumbrances of peace. He ignored a warning from suggests. He allowed a trusted auxiliary commander, Arminius, to move freely and coordinate betrayal. He entered terrain without adequate reconnaissance. He failed to maintain formation and allowed his army to be strung out. In this view, Teutoburg is a preventable disaster caused by a man unsuited to frontier command. Model 2, Varus as structurally set up. Here the focus shifts from the man to the machine. Augustus's policy, shaped by earlier successes under Drusus and Tiberius, encouraged the belief that Germania could be organized like Gaul: roads, taxes, courts, allied elites. Varus was sent as a governor, not merely as a raider. His mandate was to make Rome visible, lawful, predictable. Acting like a warlord would undercut the mission. So he brings administrators, baggage, the apparatus of rule. His vulnerability is not personal stupidity, it is the inherent risk of trying to perform legitimacy in a land where legitimacy is not yet real. Model 3, Arminius as decisive genius. This model emphasizes intentionality. Arminius, trained by Rome, understands Rome's operating system, how reports become orders, how trust is granted, how routine dulls suspicion. He manufactures a situation that looks like manageable unrest, urgent enough to compel Varus to move, but not so obviously dangerous that Varus marches in full battle posture. He coordinates attacks to maximize Roman weakness, not to smash a formed legion, but to prevent formation. The genius is not merely tactical, it is cognitive. He hacks the empire's assumptions. Model 4, Coalition politics as miracle. This model is the least romantic and perhaps the most plausible. Germania is not unified. Leaders compete, feud, bargain. The Romans exploit these divisions, they rely on them. For Arminius to destroy 3 legions, he needs more than his own war band, he needs a temporary convergence of interests among multiple groups. That convergence is fragile, and it likely comes with promises, hostages, marriage ties, threats, and the magnetic pull of a chance to strike Rome. In this view, the battle is the visible end of a diplomatic campaign conducted in smoke-filled halls and forest clearings, where oaths are sworn and broken and resworn. Which model survives the evidence? Not one alone. Varus's posture of peace is real, the baggage and non-combatants are physical facts. The multi-day nature of combat in difficult terrain is supported by both textual description and archaeological patterning. Arminius's insider status is decisive because it explains how the Romans could be so wrong about the situation they were walking into. And coalition politics explains scale, no single tribe annihilates 3 legions without broader participation. So the question is not whether Arminius was brilliant or Varus was foolish, it is how brilliance and folly can be manufactured by system conditions. Here is the turning point, the moment the autopsy needle finds the artery. In open country, a legion can become a wall, shields locked, pila thrown in volleys, ranks rotating, centurions enforcing rhythm. In a forest corridor, a legion becomes a line. A line becomes pockets. Pockets become screams. Arminius does not need to defeat the legion as Rome imagines it, he needs to prevent the legion from existing at all. Teutoburg is the anatomy of asymmetric war against a system. Terrain plus intelligence plus insider access can neutralize the world's best trained force when that force is optimized for the wrong problem. Arminius's true weapon is not the spear. It is information, what Varus thinks is happening, where Varus thinks the threat is, how urgent Varus feels. The art is to keep Varus in the middle zone, urgent enough to move, not urgent enough to move as if at war. The forest becomes the amplifier of that deception. In a city or an open plain, deception has to compete with visibility. In woodland and rain, uncertainty is the default state. Every messenger can be wrong. Every sound can be misread. Every delay can be fatal. Now feel Varus's dilemma, because it is a dilemma modern commanders still taste in their mouths. If Varus arrests Arminius without airtight proof, he risks triggering the uprising he is trying to prevent and confirming the worst suspicion about Rome, that law is merely a mask for domination. He would alienate allied elites, making cooperation brittle. If he trusts Arminius, he hands over the steering wheel. He chooses trust, or, if you prefer, he chooses the appearance of lawful partnership, because empires cannot garrison every relationship. They outsource. And outsourcing creates a point of failure that looks, in hindsight, like betrayal but is, in real time, the cost of doing business. Consider, too, the internal German cost, because victory is not the same as stability. The coalition that can kill Rome cannot easily build a replacement. Rivalries resume. Arminius, lionized in some later tellings as a national liberator, is in his own time a leader among competitors. The same skills that allow him to unite people against Rome, pressure, persuasion, intimidation, can also produce enemies at home. He will later clash with other elites, he will die by violence within his own community. This does not diminish his achievement, it reminds us that the opposite of empire is not automatically freedom. Sometimes it is simply fragmentation. Now, the bill. Blood, the dead and enslaved, the ones whose names are not in our sources but whose teeth and broken bones are. Treasure, lost pay, lost gear, lost standards. Strategy, Rome recalibrates. The Rhine becomes not just a logistical line but a psychological one. Reputation, deterrence takes a hit, because power is partly the belief that power will arrive and win. When 3 legions vanish, belief wavers. And here we meet another debate, one that shapes popular memory. The maximalist interpretation declares, Teutoburg ended Roman expansion into Germania forever. It is a clean statement, satisfying, and it flatters the drama of a single battle changing history. The cautious interpretation says, Rome did return. Rome could fight effectively east of the Rhine, Germanicus proved that Rome could impose pain and retrieve symbols. The choice not to annex may have been strategic rather than forced, an assessment of costs versus benefits, of supply lines through hostile terrain, of the limited economic incentive compared to other fronts. In this view, Teutoburg did not make annexation impossible, it made annexation unattractive. The empire learned a lesson not about capability alone, but about the price of converting capability into governance. So what, finally, was Teutoburg? Not a story of civilized versus barbarian, despite the propaganda that later ages poured into it. It is a story about an empire mistaking administration for domination. Forms and seals and tribute lists can look like control, especially from a governor's tent. But control is not the same as legitimacy. And legitimacy is not created by marching, it is created by consent, fear, habit, benefit, usually a mix of all 4. Arminius understood this. He understood that Rome's power was not merely metal and muscle, it was a narrative of inevitability. Break the narrative, and the metal feels heavier. Every empire draws a line on a map and calls it a frontier. Teutoburg teaches that sometimes the line is not the edge of territory, it is the edge of comprehension. When Rome looked east of the Rhine, it saw space to be organized. It saw forests as raw material, rivers as routes, tribes as future taxpayers. It assumed that the Roman operating system, roads, law, forts, allied elites, would run the same way it had run elsewhere. But systems are not universal. They depend on local conditions, terrain, social structure, the incentives of intermediaries, the depth of resentment, the speed at which rumors travel, the meaning of honor. Modern states still make the same mistake under different flags. We confuse compliance paperwork with legitimacy. We mistake a quiet district for a loyal district. We count metrics, arrests made, forms filed, taxes collected, and assume they represent consent. And then, when routine policing becomes insurgency, we are shocked, as if shock itself were evidence that we were right. Teutoburg is an ancient warning label. Governance performed without deep security and deep understanding can turn an army into a target-rich procession. Then there is insider risk, and I want you to hear this without romance. Arminius is not a melodramatic traitor in a cloak, he is a structural vulnerability. He is bilingual, bicultural, credentialed by the institution he later destroys. Modern equivalents exist wherever coalitions depend on local partners, contractors, intermediaries, translators, liaison officers, people who must be trusted because the system cannot function otherwise. The lesson is not, never trust. That lesson is unusable. The lesson is to understand that trust is a battlefield resource, and it can be weaponized by both sides. And then there is narrative recovery. Rome's response was not only military. It was memorial, myth, messaging. It sent armies to retrieve standards because symbols are infrastructure for belief. It revisited the dead because unburied bones are a political problem, they keep asking questions. It rewrote what happened, sometimes to blame Varus, sometimes to elevate the imperial family, sometimes to frame the disaster as anomaly rather than indictment. Modern powers do the same. We fight wars of meaning after wars of bullets, because the story of a defeat can be more contagious than the defeat itself. Why does this matter now? Because borders are rarely drawn only by victories. They are drawn by defeats that teach empires where the cost curve turns vertical. Teutoburg sits behind centuries of European imagining about where Rome ends and where something else begins. It reminds us that confident maps can be hallucinations agreed upon by bureaucrats and soldiers, until weather, terrain, and a trusted insider prove otherwise. The line you call frontier may actually be the edge of your patience, your supply chain, your cultural fluency, your political will. Here is my verdict, distilled from mud and metal and the arguments of historians who have fought over these trees for generations. The most dangerous moment for a powerful system is when it believes routine has replaced risk. Teutoburg was not the day Rome met stronger men, it was the day Rome met the limit of its assumptions. Hold that verdict up as a mirror to the present. Ask yourself where your own world confuses procedure with control. Where does your institution, your government, your company, your community, move like Varus moved, carrying the baggage of certainty into terrain it has not truly read? Where do we outsource understanding to intermediaries and then act surprised when the intermediary has his own objective? Where do we treat warnings like suggestions as inconvenient politics rather than urgent intelligence because they disrupt the story we prefer? Join the investigation. Not as spectators of ancient carnage, but as detectives of human patterns. In the comments, I want your ruling on the case file. Was Teutoburg primarily Arminius's deliberate trap, Varus's personal failure, or Rome's structural overreach, and what piece of evidence, textual or archaeological, makes you lean that way? If you have read Dio, Tacitus, Velleius, or if you have followed the debates around Caecili's Rampart, bring your citations and your doubts. We are not building a myth here, we are interrogating one. And now the legacy question, the one you cannot Google because it requires you to inhabit a mind under rain and pressure. Imagine you are Varus on the eve of the march, with Segestus' warning in one hand and Arminius's assurances in the other, and the imperial mandate pressing like a seal against hot wax. If you arrest Arminius, you may ignite rebellion and betray the performance of lawful rule. If you do not, you may lose everything. What do you do, what risk do you choose, and what part of yourself are you willing to sacrifice to live with the consequences?